Hey there, welcome to this video. This is part 2 in a 4-part series all about adapting B4 lenses to modern single-chip CMOS sensor cameras. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series, I recommend you start there before going into this video. So there'll be a link in the description, and I'll probably throw a card up in one of the corners as well. Watch video 1 if you haven't already, then come back to this video, and there'll be links in the description of video 1 to take you through to this video. So this video, part 2, is all about choosing the right adapter for your situation, and we're going to be going over the variety of types of adapters in this video that you'll find commonly. So the first thing you've got to decide on is what mount do you want to adapt the B4 lens to. So you've got a few options, and this is specifically talking about 2/3 inch B4 lenses, which are the broadcast lens standard and are the easiest to adapt. If you're looking for information on 1/3 or 1/2 inch or 1 inch broadcast lenses, good luck. They're very difficult to adapt, and I recommend you stick with the 2/3 inch B4 lenses. 1/3, 1/2 inch and 1 inch do not share the same mount. They look similar, but it's not the same mount. So 2/3 inch lenses are the main broadcast lens that is widely available anyway. So yeah, that's what we're talking about in this video. So you've really got 3 types of options here for converting B4 to a mount. You've got B4 to PL, which I'd recommend to people who are going to be using B4 lenses across a broad range of cameras, as PL is just very adaptable to a lot of different cameras and will probably work for you across a lot of different camera bodies. The second type of option is B4 mount to a mirrorless mount. So that's things like Sony E-mount, Canon RF, Micro Four Thirds, Fuji X, Nikon Z, Leica M, Panasonic L mount. And these are great because they're usually more cost effective, but it does lock you into that mount. So you're buying a B4 to a certain mount, whereas B4 to PL can then be converted on after that. And then third type of adapter is B4 to EF. These are really thin, non-optical shim adapters that I personally don't recommend. You definitely need lens support with them, as there's no steel in those adapters, but use at your own risk due to the strength of the actual adapter being only aluminium, and also because the EF mount on some cameras is full of ND filters or mirror boxes right up to the mount flange. I recommend you be careful when mounting B4 to EF adapter and then the B4 lens on top, that the B4 lens is not protruding into the mirror box or anything like that. Definitely don't want to damage the mirror box or NDs inside an EF camera. So I don't recommend adapting B4 to EF cameras. You're better off going with a PL camera or a mirrorless camera and adapting B4 to those mounts, as they'll just be more flexible for you. And there's a lot more adapters for mirrorless and PL mounts rather than EF. So which mount is better to adapt your B4 lens to? And I touched on it briefly there. B4 to mirrorless mounts are going to be great if you're on a budget, because typically they're a lot cheaper than the PL counterparts, whereas B4 to PL is just going to be far more adaptable into the future. Consider that adapter as more of an investment where you'll be using it on future cameras, and you'll be able to adapt any 2/3 inch B4 lens into any camera that can support PL mount or convert to PL mount as well in the future. So B4 to PL mount is what I recommend to people who are really serious about B4 and are going to be using it constantly over their career. You know, the $3 to $6,000 for a B4 to PL mount adapter really is not super expensive if you're going to be using it as a core part of your kit over the next 10 years. So that can be a really good investment to be able to have those massive zoom ratios of B4 lenses. It's also maybe a good thing to think about if you're thinking about a Super 35 broadcast zoom versus a 2/3 inch broadcast zoom with an adapter, that the price is about $10,000 for the Super 35, and then you're about $7,000 all in if you're going a 2/3 inch B4 lens and a PL mount adapter that's optically corrected. So it could end up a bit cheaper and a longer zoom range and a bit lighter to go the B4 route. Work with whatever you think. The Super 35 lenses will obviously hold their value a lot better, but yeah, if you want something with maximum zoom range, the full B4 kit is not terribly different in price to a Super 35 zoom lens of a similar quality. So over all the adapters I've seen, there's about 4 classifications that I can put them into. The first one is non-corrected expanding adapters. These use basic teleconverter optics in them, and they're just going to expand the image to fill larger sensors. Because the 2/3 inch sensor is much smaller than any of the single sensor CMOS camera sensors, it's important to expand the image circle to cover those larger sensors. So a non-corrected expanding adapter just does that image expansion to cover larger sensors. I've seen them with teleconverter magnifications of 1.4 to 3 times. Next up, and is a great option for people on a budget who also have a doubler built into their lens, is a basic pass-through adapter. And they all tend to look a bit like this one here. Basic pass-through adapters have no glass elements in them. They're just a B4 mount, all metal, converting to usually a mirrorless mount. They usually come with a built-in support foot, which is really great for rigging out smaller cameras. You can rig and support the lens and the adapter and then have the camera hanging off the back. These are very inexpensive and are what I recommend anybody who's looking at getting into B4 lens adapting to get first and just have a go and try it out. They can be very useful if your lens has a doubler built into the back of the lens. Next up, we've got corrected Super 16, and I'm lumping Micro Four Thirds adapters in this as well. So B4 to Super 16 or Micro Four Thirds. That's because a lot of Micro Four Thirds cameras have a Super 16 scan mode that they can shoot in. So these adapters fix spherical aberrations because they're corrected, and they expand the image slightly to cover a Super 16 sensor. And Micro Four Thirds cameras can often take advantage of that as they're able to shoot at Super 16 crop ratios as well. These Super 16 corrected adapters are also great for cameras like the FS7, FS5, FX9, and C400 and C70 because they have Super 16 scan modes, or center scan modes as some of them call it, which are Super 16 scan mode. So you're able to use this corrected adapter without a lot of light loss and get a really good image with those cameras. Finally, we have corrected Super 35 adapters. These expand the image circle to fill a Super 35 sensor, and they also optically correct the lens so that it can be used on single chip sensor cameras. So it's correcting out the spherical aberrations from those lenses to be used with a single sensor camera instead of a 3 CCD sensor camera. These adapters tend to be on the more expensive side, and they tend to be slightly longer to fit more of those expanding elements in to fill a Super 35 sensor. So those last two, the Super 16 corrected and Super 35 corrected adapters, are going to give you the best image quality because of that optical correction built in. So the next question a lot of people have is, why is an optical correcting adapter the best for image quality? Why can't I get good image quality out of a basic pass-through adapter or just using a teleconverter? So optical correcting adapters correct for spherical aberrations, which can look like haze and fog over an image, particularly present wide open to about f4 on standard definition B4 lenses when adapted. The optical correction effectively makes it so when you're adapting a B4 lens, you're getting effectively native image quality. And these lenses are quite good on native B4 cameras. So you're getting on par image quality with the native B4 camera when you're optically correcting. As I mentioned before, non-corrected adapters produce a fuzzy, hazy, washed out image. That's because all the light channels are sort of overlapping and mixing and not coming to a defined point on the sensor. So a basic pass-through adapter is not really suitable for people who are going to want to shoot wide open or under f5.6 for B4 lenses. If you're wanting to shoot in that range of wide iris values, you need an optical correcting adapter. If you're on a budget and you absolutely cannot afford an optical correcting adapter, you can use the doubler, which will correct about 60 to 70% of the spherical aberrations, and it will expand the image circle to about 70% of Super 35 coverage. So the doubler built into some lenses does a little bit of optical correction. Not as good as a full optically corrected adapter, but if you're on a budget, that's a great way to get some correction. Otherwise, if you don't have an optically corrected adapter and you don't have a doubler built into your lens, you might be able to stop down to 5.6 to f8 to get some sort of clarity back in the image. It really limits the usefulness of the lenses shooting at a minimum of f5.6 to f11, particularly in the low light and shallow depth of field. Important note down the bottom here is that these adapters do not fix chromatic aberrations. Whatever the lens's chromatic aberrations are on a native camera, they'll still be there on an adapted camera, because corrected adapters don't fix chromatic aberrations, they fix spherical aberrations, which are a different aberration type. So chromatic aberrations are like purple and green fringing on the sides of high contrasting edges, whereas spherical aberrations are smearing and ghostiness over basically everything in the image. So a little bit of a visualization here. You can see the prism block picture here, splitting the red, green and blue wavelengths. This type of prism block is in 3 CCD sensor cameras, and it splits off the red, the green and the blue channels of light into 3 separate sensors that are like stacked like that around the prism. And those 3 sensors, the red, the green and the blue sensors that light is splitting off to, are in slightly different focal planes. So B4 lenses are designed to focus those 3 wavelengths of light onto those slightly different focus planes. So when adapting to a single chip camera, you don't have those 3 slightly different focal planes. You have a single focal plane of the single sensor CMOS camera. So when you project an image from a B4 lens uncorrected, the light coming through is trying to land on those 3 slightly different sensor planes, whereas we want it to land on a single sensor plane for adapting. That's where an uncorrected lens gets that hazing in the image, because one channel of light is trying to focus behind the sensor, one channel of light is focusing on the sensor, and there's another one focusing in front of the sensor. And so you're getting mushiness between the 3 because they're not all focused on the single point of the sensor. So that's where an optical correcting adapter comes in. You've got 3 wavelengths of light coming in on ever so slightly different focal planes. Then it goes through the optical correcting adapter and they converge so they can be projected onto a single sensor focal plane. That's how optical correcting adapters work and why they improve the image so much compared to a non-optical correcting adapter for single sensor CMOS cameras. If you're using B4 lenses on a native B4 camera, there's no need to use an optical correcting adapter. You've either got the 3 CCD sensor with the prism, or you've got an optical block in front of a CMOS sensor already built into that native B4 camera. So very importantly, this is not all talk. Here's some examples. On the left, we have an uncorrected lens in Super 16, no doubler used for correction. So this is just straight from the lens, basic pass-through adapter, not corrected at all. And you can see how smeary and hazy the image is with no great defined details wide open. And then we move over to the image on the right, and this is the exact same camera, exact same lens, exact same camera position, but now with a Super 16 corrected adapter added into the mix. And you can see normal amounts of sharpness, normal amounts of contrast and detail. It is heavily backlit, so there's not like a crazy amount of front-facing detail, but I promise you the difference in Super 16 is night and day between non-corrected and then optically corrected. So let's go over the 3 different types of adapters that I actually recommend you might want to consider. So first off, we've got the basic pass-through adapters. These are great. These are really easy to find, low cost, and they're usually built fully out of metal, so they're very durable. The locking rings work really well, and yeah, they've been basically refined to be affordable, durable, strong. They come with a support foot. The The only thing they don't have is an optical correcting element in them, so they're not perfect for professional use, but a lot of money to spend on adapting B4. These are a really, really great place to start off your journey into B4. You're not going to get the most amazing image quality, but you're going to have some fun at a low cost. These basic pass-through adapters are generally 2/3 inch B4 to a mirrorless mount. So commonly I see B4 to micro four thirds, B4 to Sony E mount, and B4 to Fuji X mount in these adapters. I'm sure they're for other mirrorless mounts as well. So if you bought a B4 lens that has a doubler built into the lens, these can also be a great option because the doubler, where it's engaged, can expand the image to cover 70% of a Super 35 sensor, and it can also correct the image about 60 to 70%. It's not a perfect correction, but it's a definite improvement over not using the doubler, and if you don't have an optical correcting adapter, using the doubler is a great option for a moderate amount of correction. So that's what I'd usually recommend. I'd recommend for people getting into B4 lenses, buy a basic pass-through adapter, get a lens with a doubler, use the lens with the doubler engaged for that 60 to 70% correction, and then you've got a really affordable entry-level B4 lens setup. It's not going to blow anyone away with sharpness and image quality, but if you're on a budget, it might just fit your needs for your type of projects that maybe don't need the best image quality, they just need a long parfocal zoom range. Next up, more details on the non-corrected teleconverter adapters. These adapters usually house simple teleconverter optics, which are used to expand the image circle to fill larger sensors. While they may not offer any significant image correction, they're usually affordable and effective at expanding the projected image circle, and are much cheaper than corrected adapters. So they can be used to cover larger sensors like a Super 35 or even full frame sensor cameras. And as I said, they're relatively affordable compared to a corrected adapter. I've seen them with magnifications from 1.4, which is probably best for Super 16 and micro four thirds sensor cameras, all the way up to 3 times magnification. I haven't tested this myself, but using one of these teleconverter adapters to expand the image and using the doubler in the lens might yield a decent image quality result. Probably not as much as a corrected adapter, but it could be slightly better than a basic pass-through adapter, whilst also expanding the image. Basically, a key takeaway point at this stage is that get yourself a lens with a doubler, because that doubler within the lens can give you a 60 to 70% image correction. So you could potentially use it with basic pass-through or teleconverter optics. So something that a lot of people don't think about when getting into adapting B4 lenses is the types of light loss you can get from adapting B4 lenses. So 2/3 inch B4 lenses are designed to project a really tiny image circle on a 2/3 inch broadcast sensor. And when we're adapting that lens, we're typically wanting it to cover a larger sensor type. So Super 16 and micro four thirds sensors are the easiest to expand to. About 1.1 times to 1.5 times is a very light expansion ratio to cover those sensors. And you lose very minimal light, about 1 to 1.5 stops of light. So slightly expanding the image to Super 16 and micro four thirds, not terribly difficult to do, and you're really not losing a lot of light. 1 stop to 1.5 stops of light, which is as best as you can get to a native B4 lens experience. You've still got all the excellent low light capability, losing a stop of light. This can work really well with cameras that are older, like my FS7, or cameras that have low base ISOs. Moving on now to expanding to Super 35 sensors. This is 2 to 2.5 times of image expansion. You're losing 2 to 2.5 stops of light now for Super 35 image coverage, which doesn't sound like a huge jump from the 1 to 1.5 stops for a Super 16 sensor. But Super 35 is where you really start to notice the light intensity loss, and you're probably going to want a camera with a high base ISO, so that if you're shooting indoors or in darker locations, you can still get adequate exposure. Cameras with a low base ISO are really going to struggle when you're losing those 2 to 2.5 stops of light to expand to Super 35. My old FS7, for example, has a base ISO of 2000, which is really the minimum I would recommend for people if you're shooting with one of these Super 35 expanded adapters, that you have a base ISO of at least 1000 or 2000. When I'm shooting at 2000 ISO on my FS7, I don't have too much troubles besides nighttime shooting. So I tend to shoot with the Super 16 adapters so that I have as much light as possible using an older camera. If you have a modern camera with a high base ISO, this is nothing. You'll be able to easily shoot with losing the 2 to 2.5 stops for a Super 35 adapter, no problem there. So finally, adapting to full frame, because I get asked about it all the time, people want to adapt to FX6s and FX3s, you need more than 4 times worth of image expansion to cover full frame sensors, and it's not really something I recommend because you're getting significant light loss there. You're going to 100% need a camera with a really high base ISO to use. You're not exactly going to be starved for light in bright outdoor conditions, but when you go indoors and in darker situations, or even just dim situations, that's where you're going to really feel it. So you'll definitely need a modern camera with a high base ISO if you're doing more the full frame coverage with more than 4 times image expansion for coverage there. And you may not be able to shoot at all at night and get a decent exposure. It just might not be possible. I wouldn't recommend at all expanding all the way to full frame. You're better off using it on Super 16, Micro Four Thirds, or Super 35 sensor cameras, as the light loss in those situations is quite manageable for cameras. So, budget option number 1, use a basic pass-through adapter, have a lens with a doubler built in, engage that doubler, it'll expand to 70% of a Super 35 sensor coverage, and with the doubler you'll get 60 to 70% spherical aberration correction. Great for people starting out as a hobbyist or just interested in trying out B4 lenses. Get yourself an affordable B4 lens with the doubler and you're ready to go. Test it out, try it out, and see what you can do with a parfocal, very long zoom range. Budget option 2 is using an adapter that uses the Blackmagic B4 optical mount that's used on their Ursa broadcast cameras. That's a corrected B4 mount, and basically some people in the community, including myself, have adapted those Blackmagic B4 optical mounts to then convert to mirrorless mounts. These have 1.1 times image expansion and optical correction and are designed to, with nothing else, cover Super 16 size sensors or Micro Four Thirds when you're cropping down into a Super 16 mode. And if you use a lens with a doubler built into it and engaged, you can cover 95% of a Super 35 sensor as well with one of these adapters. So they're fantastic value for money because the Blackmagic B4 optic is readily available and quite a bit more affordable. It's just a matter of people in the community converting those B4 optical mounts to a mirrorless mount. So these type of adapters provide excellent value for money and are the most affordable way to get into an optically corrected setup. So you can get professional and modern image quality results and be getting the best you can out of your lens. So those are the 2 budget options. Now we're going into working pro option, which is buying a IBE, Kip-On or ARRI adapter. These are B4 to PL mount adapters, either for Super 16 or Super 35 sensors. They're all very high quality, high precision with stainless steel mounts and optical correction and either Super 16 or Super 35 image expansion. They're HD rated, and then there's some really expensive ones that are 4K rated as well. And they adapt to a PL mount, which is more adaptable for professionals using into the future, so they can use it on cameras into the future that can adapt from their mount to PL. If your type of work really commonly works well with B4 lenses, then one of these more expensive adapters might be really worthwhile investing in because of their longevity, and you'll be able to use them for years, decades, and really get your money's worth out of investing in one. So now you know the core things to consider when buying a B4 adapter for your camera. You'll be able to take this information now and be able to use it in your decision when buying an adapter. If you need more specific information and guidance on your situation, I always offer consultation calls, so there'll be some information on how to book one and how much it costs down in the description. So this is the end of part 2 in a 4-part series. So part 1, we talked all about choosing a B4 lens. In this video, part 2, we talked about choosing an adapter for adapting that B4 lens. And then in part 3, which is the next video, we're going to talk about lens support for B4 lenses because they're quite long, and when you're adapting you probably need lens support. So that is the next video, which I will link a card when it's available. Otherwise check down in the description and there'll be a link to it when it's available. So I hope you found this video helpful and getting some more information on adapters for B4 lenses. If you did find it useful, drop a like down below. It helps me know that what I'm doing is useful and it helps get this video out to more people. If you've got any questions, you can comment down below and I'll answer all the questions. Otherwise, consider hitting subscribe and the bell icon. There's more B4 lenses coming on this channel, particularly finishing out the last 2 parts of this series. Alright, I will see you on the next video in this series where we're going to talk all about lens support for B4 lenses.